Hi, this is Jessica Kalinowski, and this is week 3 of using information effectively in technology. And this week we had to read an article about Easter Island and another one on the Henderson and the Pitcairn Islands. In the first article, we learned that the Eastern Island, it is the most remote habitable island. The nearest lands to it are the Chilean coast, 2,300 miles away, and the Pitcairn Islands, 1,300 miles away. It was discovered by a Dutch explorer by the name of Jacob Roggeveen, I hope I pronounced that right, in 1722. It is the closest example of a complete ecological disaster in complete isolation. Basically, the climate had, the island had once had at least 6 native species of birds and many native trees that once the Dutch discovered it were completely extinct by that time. So what I took from the article was that I saw the island as a system, and there is a list that the author gives us that I feel are the attributes of this island system that affects the rate of deforestation and lets you know if an island will be deforested at any given time. And the list that they gave us was what affects deforestation in Pacific Islands. Deforestation is more severe on dry islands than wet islands, cold high-altitude islands than warm equatorial islands, old volcanic islands than young volcanic islands, islands without aerial ash fallout than islands with it, islands far from Central Asia's dust plume than islands near it, islands without makatea than islands with it, low islands than high islands, remote islands than islands with near neighbors, and small islands than big islands. And the problem with Easter Island is it has almost all of those attributes. It has the 3rd highest latitude, among the lowest rainfall of all Polynesian islands, the lowest volcanic ash fallout, and the farthest away from Asian dust fallout, which both of those bring nutrients into the soil that are eked out through erosion or just time, basically. It has no makatea, which is when a coral reef is thrust out of the water and forms an island from there. And it is very rocky and desolate, so not many people want to live on an island that can shred your hands and feet just by walking on it, so deforestation happens a lot more slowly there, just because nobody wants to live there. And it also has the 2nd greatest distance between neighbors, and that is an effect that also contributed to the demise of the Pitcairn and the Henderson Islands, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. So combining all of these factors and attributes of this system, plus the religious practices of the inhabitants, led to the eventual deforestation and collapse of the system. The religious practices of the Easter Island peoples was constructing and erecting ahu and moai. The ahu were basically rock bases centered around crematoriums, and on top of them they placed structures, the moai, which were representations of chiefs and such, so they're the big heads that you usually see. However, creating those used a lot of resources. You had to have a lot of timber to transport the very large and very heavy rocks from the crater at the top of the island all the way to wherever you wanted to bring them. So that used a lot of timber, and you also needed a lot of food to fuel the workers, the laborers that created the Ahu stone masons, or the Moai statues, and then for the ones that transported them, and then the feasts for when they were erected. So it was a lot of food, and by getting all that food, you needed to create more gardens, so you had to cut down more trees and more forests. And because of all these factors, the growth rate of trees and forests to get bounced back from that is very low. So deforestation happened very quickly. And I actually have an example of the Moai with animals, because the purpose of the Moai was to create basically structures that looked like old chieftains. And so a lot of the, throughout the years, the sizes of the Moai increased, which showed that there was fierce competition between the rival clan chiefs for who had the biggest and the best Moai. And that also increased in the deforestation because they had to use more and more and more every year. And my example of this is the stag beetle. It has, instead of, for its mandibles, which are the front pincers in its mouth, they're extremely exaggerated in the males through evolution to where they're almost twice the size of their thorax. So extremely large. And they're only for showing off and mating rituals to attract mates. So basically, they can barely feed themselves because they can't fit any food in their mouth. However, they use these to show off and say, hey, I have the biggest mandible, so I'm the best and biggest guy, and I should get the most girls. And then another example that I have correlates with one of the attributes they incorporated into the Moai later in the generations, which is they started to add a pukao, I believe that's how you pronounce it, on the top of the Moai, which is like the headdress of red bird feathers that chieftains wore. So basically it was a red stone headdress that they added for more height, basically, onto the Moai. And my example of that is the Bowerbirds, which make huge displays for affection and attention for the females. It's always the males. And they oftentimes scavenge many berries and twigs and leaves and decorate the front of their their nesting home with this, and it all depends on the guy, really. Some of the males are attracted to blue colors, so they take blueberries and steal even blue plastic and all this stuff from humans, and others are attracted to red, so they take red berries and red plastic and red rings and all these things. So it's very interesting the way they choose to decorate their houses. And my addition to this on the Pitcairn and the Henderson Islands is I like to view them as a small world network along with their mother island of Mangareva. They are among the most remote islands in the Polynesian coast, the Polynesian area, excuse me. And basically, Pitcairn and the Henderson Islands were very small, and they were somewhat close to each other. They were 300 miles away from each other, but they were like 1,000 miles away from the mother island of Mangareva. However, they had continuous trade routes between the three of them that allowed for a small but steady population on the Pitcairn and the Henderson Islands. And through the trade routes, they were able to get the fine quality carving stones from Pitcairn, the huge bountiful source of migrating nesting birds and fish and shellfish from the Henderson Islands, because the island was mostly Makatea, so it had a very good coral reef system. And from the mother island, they were able to get tools and crops that they could not grow at the other islands, and also marriageable peoples, because with the small populations on those two islands, they are unable to basically have marriages between each other without going into the incest taboo, and that's very bad. So they would bring peoples in from the mother island and repopulate those areas. And my example, well, I don't really have an example right yet, but I like to think of them as a small world network that is a good example of small world networks, that when their main pathway of communication between the different ends is disrupted or completely taken away, the nonlinear system can completely dissolve. And I think this is a good example of the butterfly effect, because like Easter Island, Mangariva had a high rate of deforestation because of its location, and so it had similar problems that the Easter Island people had, which led to ecological crises, and that led to cultural and political crises, because they ended up having too many people for so few resources. They ended up having a civil war and resorted to cannibalism and things of that nature. And because of this, the trade routes completely dissolved. So there was no trade back and forth between the Pitcairn and the Henderson Islands and Mangariva. And because of this, the populations of the Pitcairn and the Henderson Island were put into complete isolation, which led to the inhabitants' eventual extinction. So that is not good. So that's all I have for this week. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you.